Welcome to the Center for International and Regional Studies at Georgetown University in Qatar. This podcast series is part of the Energy Humanities Research Initiative. The project aims to generate new scholarly conversations on everyday lived experiences of energy.
Greetings from Doha and welcome to our new podcast episode on lived experiences of energy. I am Firat Oruc, Assistant Professor of Literature and Humanities in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University in Qatar. Our guest today is a dear friend and colleague, Dr. Anto Mohsin. Anto Mohsin is Assistant Professor in the Liberal Arts Program at Northwestern University in Qatar and an affiliated faculty member of Science in Human Culture program in the Weinberg College of Arts and Sciences at Northwestern University. He received his PhD in Science and Technology Studies from Cornell University, where he was also trained in the Southeast Asia program. He was also the recipient of the Henry Luce Postdoctoral Fellowship in Asian Environmental Studies at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. Anto's main research and teaching interests are in energy studies and in Southeast Asia studies, exploring particularly how electrification intersects with issues of equality, social justice, development ideology, and national sovereignty. He has a forthcoming book on the sociopolitical history of electrification in post-independence Indonesia. Anto, welcome to our podcast series. Can we start with a personal intellectual account of what brought you to the field of energy studies? How did you develop the scholarly interest in writing the history of the post-colonial nations such as Indonesia from the vantage point of electrification?
Thank you very much for this great first question, Firat. Before I begin, I'd like to thank you and thank Georgetown University in Qatar again for inviting me to take part in this podcast episode, which is part of the GUQ's wonderful research initiative on energy humanities. Thank you. I have a short answer and also a long answer to the question that you posed. The short version is that when I was in grad school, I learned that there were still little scholarly works on the history of science and technology in Indonesia. And I wanted to be one of the technology storytellers of modern Indonesia's history. I learned especially that Indonesia, just like many other post-independent nation states that emerged in the middle of 20th century, they use science and technology to build their nations. They employed scientific and technological projects to develop their nation, modernize their nation. Electrification received particular attention from many of these new governments. They marshal resources, state resources, and obtain substantial fundings from international donors. So electricity, I learned, was deemed vital for many of these countries' modernization efforts. And there are different pathways to electrifying their countries form a crucial and to me interesting technological story of the second half of the 20th century. So the story of how and why Indonesia electrified the country it's part of this larger historical narrative that I found fascinating to explore and examine. That's the short version of it. But if you'd allow me, I can I can expand that a little bit more, which is the longer version of it. I
Please.
think thank you. I think I can trace back my scholarly interest to the time when I was working as a professional engineer. So you see, I studied mechanical engineering in college and then worked as a mechanical design engineer for General Electric. So I was part of an engineering team that designed steam turbines used in power plants for the company's customers all over the world. I also got a chance to work in a different division that helped design gasifiers, this huge machine that turned coal into synthetic gas, which can be used in gas turbines to power gas turbines in power plants. So working in this area, this was back in the beginning to mid 2000s, um, led me to develop a broader interest in energy issues. I was observing that energy consumption throughout the world was on the rise, and fossil-based fuels were in limited supply. Nations in the world would get into conflicts over these non-renewable energy resources, and people passionately debate about alternative energy solutions. Um, GE, the company I was working for at the time, highlighted these issues as well. And the company tried to tell its employees and the world that it has just the right solutions for these problems. At first, I was persuaded by this narrative. As a trainee engineer, my thinking was mainly framed in technical terms. You know, whatever the problem that the world has or is facing, I thought the science and technology could definitely provide the solutions. But then I came to learn that these so-called quote unquote technological fixes weren't always the only or even the right solutions. In many areas, for example, we want to talk about renewable energy, the sun does not always shine to power solar panels. Wind turbines could kill birds, are noisy, and not profitable for land development. And some people think they are unsightly, okay, even though they are offered as solutions. I also read in the news at that time that corn-based biofuels could actually create more problems than they could solve. So taking in all of this confusing and contradictory accounts, I yearned to understand these issues a little bit better. And a close friend who was completing his PhD at a nearby university at the time, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, suggested that I take a graduate seminar taught by one of his advisors. The seminar was called Technology and Social Theory, and this course changed my life. Before taking the course, I hadn't realized that we can study technology using the theories, methods, and lines of inquiries of the social science and humanities discipline. So after taking the graduate seminar, I seriously prepared myself for graduate school, applied, got accepted, and quit my job. The rest, as they say, is history. And when I started grad school, um, my advisor, my initial advisor, all incoming grad schools were paired by initial mentors, was Professor Ron Klein. And he had a similar experience like me. So he happened to also have worked as an engineer for GE before becoming a noted historian of technology. So I was quite naturally attracted to him and his works. And so I studied his publications, and one of the books that he's published explored technology and social change in rural America. And one of the technologies that he examined was electricity. And when I was searching for a dissertation topic, and I considered a few different topics at the beginning, so Professor Klein at one point advised me to take advantage of my language skills in Indonesian. I was born and partly raised there. And other professors and friends also urged me to consider using the resources that are available at this Cornell Library's Eccles collection. And what an impressive collection, I found out. Rows of books and journals, magazine reports on and produced in Indonesia can be found there. So after giving some thoughts, I decided to write my dissertation prospectus examining the history of modern Indonesia from the perspective of electrification. This is how I developed my scholarly interest in studying the history of post-independence Indonesia from the point of view of electrification.
This is really interesting. Of course, Cornell is sort of the place where probably the most important text on the emergence of post-colonial nations nationalism was also written. That's Benedict Anderson's Imagined
Correct.
Communities, right?
That's correct, yes.
And from that perspective, I think your work is really important for post-colonial studies, a field in which I have been trained, and for a long time didn't really paid much attention to the centrality of the scientific, technological, energy discourses in post-independence visions, right? We have only very much paid attention to national liberation speeches, so to speak. But as your work shows, most of that vision was sort of transferred into the way the infrastructure for the new nation, including electrification, would be put into practice and so on.
Yes, correct. I was accepted in a graduate program called Science and Technology Studies. So that's why I think I was trained to pay particular attention to the materiality of national identity, nationalism, and national discourses, right? So when I got my hand on Benedict Anderson's famous and quite influential, right, even up until today, and in many different fields, like you said, Imagined Communities, I read it using that lens. And there's a chapter in the book, right, at least in the second edition, not the first one, that talks about maps, census, and museums, right, that help raise national consciousness among people in the Netherlands East Indies at the time.
And you have recently taken an interest in expanding your geographical exploration of energy and electrical history to include Qatar. If I were to ask you to give us a sketch of electrified Doha, how would that look like? What kind of an image would it invoke? As someone who has been in Doha for some time, I'm still struck by how much an illuminated city it is.
Yes, Doha is a brightly lit city. And actually, you can see an image of Doha at night, Firat. And I don't mean just the photos of the colorfully illuminated downtown Doha skyscrapers that you can find online. There are many of such images. What I'm talking about is the images that NASA produced. So there's a NASA satellite, I think it's called NASA Suomi Polar Orbiting Partnership, Suomi NPP satellite, that took images of our Earth at night in April and October 2012. And the images that the satellite took are composited, and they show how our Earth was lit up at night in 2012. These images are available online. They can be downloaded. I've used this image in my undergraduate course to talk about our electrified world. And in one of these images, you can see how Qatar is very well illuminated country. So urban areas such as Doha, Al Khor, Lusail, Mesaid, Wakra, Dukhan, and others, and the main roads connecting these urban centers, the Al Shamal Road, the Dukhan Road, and the Salwa Road, all the way up to the Saudi border, glow very bright at night. You can also see some glaring spots out in the sea. I think where the offshore oil and gas platforms and other installations are located. The only dark spots on that image are the uninhabited desert areas, right? The northwestern part of Qatar and also the southwestern part of the country. But the NASA satellite image of Qatar at night, to me at least, reveals not just where people live, right? We would immediately know where the urban centers are located, or its highly developed electric infrastructure, right? That supply electricity to illuminate these places, but also the existence of Qatar's other infrastructures, such as transportation, the highways, and oil and gas. But going back to Doha, Doha is brightly lit, and it's an ultra electrified space, very, very well illuminated. And the prevalence of electric lighting used in many buildings, street lights, houses, and parks can be felt almost everywhere in Doha, right? I think you experienced this yourself. There are, of course, yes, there are some dark pockets, and I've seen them, such as the alleyways between residential buildings in downtown Doha, for example, or just empty open spaces when there are no buildings, and perhaps some other areas that haven't visited. But you know, everywhere you go in Doha at night, you can be sure to experience a well-illuminated city. But because of this, according to researchers of one study, and I'd be happy to share this study and other studies that I might cite today, they say that Doha is one of the cities that suffers some of the worst light pollutions on the world. Qatar in general, not just Doha. Qatar suffers from some of the worst light pollution in the world. In fact, if I recall correctly, the study says that Qatar ranks third as the most light polluted country in the world, behind the first one, I think, is Singapore, and then the second one, Kuwait. I remember this. One student of mine once told me that she couldn't use a telescope that her parents bought her to see the stars in Doha. She'd need to go to escape to the desert to do so. So yeah, brightly lit, but also heavily light polluted. And there's also another dimension of Doha's illuminated cityscape that perhaps you have noticed too, Firat. Artificial lighting is used aesthetically to enhance the city's bridges, parks, buildings, roads, and highways. Right? In some
even
places,
individual properties mentions, right?
Yes. You might have seen this too. In some places, you can see a colorful streetlights along the Al Bida Park, for example, or on one of the highways going to the Hamad International Airport. I think it's designed and installed this way to entice visitors and tourists and to project Qatar's status as a modern nation. But in the light of global warming, right? Discourses of global warming, awareness of global warming, these types of artificial illuminations of Doha and other urban centers in Qatar bring to the foreground questions about sustainable electricity consumption, right? Can this be sustainable in the future? Can Qatar transition to electricity generated from renewable energy sources and keep up the same level of artificial lighting intensity? So these are some of the questions that need to be explored, I think.
Absolutely. And scholars of science and technology studies, such as yourself, have been critically examining five key dimensions of energy. And even in your reflections about Electrified Doha, I think they came out that, namely design, production, marketing, usage, and maintenance. In what ways these five dimensions of technology studies can serve as guidelines to talk about energy as lived experience?
Thank you, Firat, for that question. Yes, these five dimensions are really different aspects that STS scholars have used to examine the development of technological systems. We tend to call them socio-technical systems because the social component of it needs to be incorporated and considered and examined as well. So in the beginning, STS scholars and technology historians or technology studies scholar, including sociologists of technology, anthropologists of technology, focus mainly on the design and production dimensions of technological development. And then they would also integrate the marketing dimension to their study as well. And then a couple decades ago, user and uses of technology became the focal point of technology studies scholar, right? Many STS scholars have argued that technologies are not only shaped by designers and producers, or by marketers as well, for that matter, but also by users. Excuse me. Many STS scholars have argued that technologies are not shaped by designers and producers, but also by users, including users who resisted or rejected technologies. Technology studies scholar and STS scholars have started to pay more attention to users and users of technology. And recently, there's been a growing attention and call to examine the maintenance and maintainers of technology because many technology studies scholars have been focusing too much on innovations and innovators. The smooth functioning of the majority of our technologies, including electricity, is made possible largely because there are an army of people who do the upkeep, repair, maintenance, but they haven't been given enough attention to scholars. So I believe paying attention to examining and thinking using these five different dimensions would help broaden our understanding of energy as lived experience. We would not just focus on the consumers, the users, or also non-users in this case, who live, think about, and deal with energy, but also on energy designers, energy producers, and in this case, I would include both material producers, also knowledge producers of energy, energy marketers, and energy maintainers.
And from that perspective, in what ways do you think these five dimensions manifest themselves in the Doha, in the context of Doha? Any reflections about that, observations?
Yeah, a little bit. I've just started my research on electrification in Qatar recently. After teaching one of my courses for a few semesters now. So I took up a bit of interest in examining electrification in Qatar. So let's start with energy designers. Engineers, urban planners, architects, managers, even workers who work for different energy organizations, such as Kahrama, decision makers in the Qatari government, and other relevant parties, I'd say belong to this group, right? To ensure the availability of abundant, affordable, stable, and reliable electricity to the growing populations in Qatar, but also to many different areas, right? You've noticed that Doha is been expanding and many new places are being built. Um, they need to come up with a well-planned design. Okay. Now, I'm not sure when it started exactly, but I learned there's been I'm not sure when it started exactly, but I learned there's been 13 phase power transmission system expansion in Qatar so far. 13 phases. Um, it may have begun in the early 2000s when the Ministry of Electricity and Water uh, shifted the responsibilities to transmit and distribute electricity to Kahrama. I'm not sure. That's my best guess. But people who deal with these expansions of Qatar's electric infrastructure, in many ways, I believe, think and deal with energy every day. Okay? Where to put the substations, the distribution substations, and why in that locations, and how that might affect other infrastructure or buildings in that area, and so on. Okay, so electricity designers, I think, would be a group of people that is worth examining as well, because they live, think about, and deal with energy. Um, I think it would also be instructive to examine electricity and energy producers who produce energy and electricity in Qatar. Yeah? Many in Qatar, many residents of Qatar perhaps take for granted the availability of abundant electricity. But being trained in STS, I want to know a little bit more. Who are the major players? Okay? So what I've learned is in Qatar, the responsibilities to produce power and also water, interestingly, not just electricity, um, are given to this company called Qatar Water and Electricity Company, or QWEC. It's a semi-private company, and a few independent power and water producers. So I'd say the operators, technicians, engineers, and managers who work for QWEC, and also at the power plants located at Ras Abu Fantas, for example, or who work for other IPPs, such as the Masaid Power Company and the Ras Lafan Power Company. They all have interesting experiences with energy from the production side. Okay? Their daily practices, their training, the skills that they acquired, knowledge gained, whether tacit or implicit, would be worth examining as well, in my mind. And like I said before, in this group, I would also put electric knowledge producer and the institutions where they work, learn, and produce knowledge. Okay? Qatar, for example, has enough resources and capital to import all the engineers, all the electrical engineers and other professional engineers needed to design, build these power plants. But they decided to establish programs in schools where they would train cadres of or generations of these engineers, right? Texas A&M University in Qatar, for example, has electrical and computer engineering, and also petroleum engineering for that matter. And Qatar University has a Department of Electrical Engineering, and HBKU offers a Master's of Science and PhD in Sustainable Energy programs. So just knowing about this and being aware and are something that STS scholars like myself are interested in studying more. So these programs, the institutions and the people who are involved in them, the students, the professors, and the administrators are all part of this large system that produce energy in the country. And it's interesting to examine them as well. And as for energy marketers, these are a really interesting group of people. In some countries, Firat, the company or the organizations that build electric infrastructure or distributed electricity also acted as marketers or promoters of electrical appliances. For example, I read in a book called Then There Was Light about rural electrification in Ireland. The Electricity Supply Board in Ireland, not only the employees of the Electricity Supply Board in Ireland, not only electrified Ireland's countryside, but they also tried to sell the latest electric gadgets. in Zanzibar, the Zanzibar Electricity Corporation sent out their employees to demonstrate how some electric devices work to their existing and also potential electricity customers. So in Doha, in the 1950s, there were stores selling electric appliances, and these stores were lined up along a street known as the Al-Kahraba Street, or Electricity Street. And nowadays, these stores are spread all over Doha at various strip malls. They help market electric appliances and electric light bulbs. In fact, I buy my electric light bulbs at those stores because they're cheaper than the ones sold at supermarket chains. This is just a practice that I do. So of course you find stores selling electric and electronic appliances in many malls in Doha now, right? And advertisement and promotional campaigns such as the Qatar Shopping Festival help drive the sales of many of these devices. So why this is important? Well, what I like to point out is that marketers of electricity and electrical products are a varied group of people, and they play an equally vital role in shaping consumers' behaviors, preferences, decisions, and consequently their lived experiences of electricity. For users of energy, much has been said and examined, I think, because this tends to be the main focus of scholars when they explore energy as lived experiences. Things such as inequalities, right? Disparities of access to electricity, the user's daily experience of electricity, different types of users, and their consumption patterns are some of the topics that they examine. But one thing that I want to highlight is that they're also non-users as well, perhaps even resistors of technology. So one of the readings that I like to assign in my undergraduate STS courses is on Amish technology, because the Amish communities in the United States decided not to be connected to the power grid. So there's this community in the United States that many of my students perhaps initially perceive as the most technologically advanced country in the world, that resists electricity, that you don't use electricity coming from the grid. Why do they do that? Well, it has to do with their socio-religious values that they like to uphold and use to guide their selection and adoption of technologies, including electricity. So I use this reading to talk about technology and values, whether personal or social values. So finally, maintenance. I know there are people who maintain the various components of electric infrastructure here in Qatar. I know that. But at this point, unfortunately, I have very little knowledge about them and their work. There are not many sources that I've found so far that highlight this labor force and their work, unfortunately. Like a quick keyword search in one of the English language newspapers here in Doha for the word linesman, for example, uh, return more about the sports related articles instead of the maintenance people who maintain transmission lines. But the maintainers of technologies and electric infrastructure, their labor, knowledge, skills, and conditions um, need to be made more visible as well, because their daily energy lived experience might provide some useful insights for us as well.
Wow, this is indeed a very informative account of how the key dimensions of energy manifest themselves in Doha. And I think, as you suggested, also the extent to which the entire energy infrastructure, particularly electricity, is really dependent on migrant expertise, which suggests an important area of study to be done, right?
Yes, correct. Yes, nicely put, Fred.
And as you just suggested, electrification retains a special cultural memory in Doha's urban history. All Doha's main street, as you just said, it was also known as the heart of Doha, is called Al-Kahraba Street. Kahraba, the Arabic word for electricity. And Al Kahraba was not only the first illuminated street in Qatar, but also the primary destination of migrant labor communities. And now, under the name of Sahat Al Kahraba, the Electricity Square, it is the center of Qatar's most ambitious gentrification project, the Musharraf downtown. So, as a historian of electricity, what are your reflections on the energy discourses of gentrified development? You know, smart power and all these sort of buzzwords that come with gentrification development discourses.
Yeah, this is an excellent question, Firat. So I learned that the Al Kahraba Street was so named because in the mid 1950s there was a power plant built in downtown Doha, and then there's a cable laid to transmit and distribute electricity from that power plant, and the street's curvature followed that cable, the line of the cable.
And I
that's
learned so this. Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I learned this in one of the four houses of the Musharraf museums, actually, in Mohammed bin Jassim house. So there's an exhibit. I believe it's a permanent exhibit. I haven't been there in a while though. That shows remnants of what Al-Kahraba used to look like. So there's the signage of the street, and as you said, the street was Doha's most one of Doha's most important meeting places for migrant workers to come there and also establish shops. Right, there are a lot of electrical appliances stores lining the street. And so it was one of the first street, if not the first street in Doha to have artificial lighting and neon signage. Um, and the street is preserved in the Musharraf downtown properties in the name, at least, and perhaps also the outline of the street. I'm not too sure about that. But of course, it has a different outlook and feel now. And as you indicated, it's part of this thing called the electricity square, right? Sahat al-Kahraba, which is part of the larger Musharraf downtown Doha. So how is this gentrifications of this area? And there have been many gentrifications of places in many different areas, as you pointed out, right? In Brooklyn, in New York City, for example, in New Orleans, especially after Hurricane Katrina, in many cities in Southeast Asia, in Jakarta, Singapore, and elsewhere. Musharraf Properties, the developer of this area, to the best of my knowledge, designed and marketed this region as a smart city with green buildings, smart electricity meter, automated waste collection, built in one big sustainable downtown area. And it boasts pedestrian walkways, electric tram, solar panels, underground service tunnel. They're all designed to use energy efficiently. So in short, the area was constructed and has been marketed as a sustainable, livable, commutable area. So this is connected to the energy discourses on sustainability and energy transition to renewable energy regimes, I believe. And this reminds me of the webinar held a few weeks ago, right? That the GUQ Energy Humanities Seminar initiated with Dominic Boyer, Sarah Pritchett, and Jessica Wenzel. At one point, they all addressed this topic of energy transition. I think it was Dominic Boyer who cited an example from his and his partner's work examining the development of wind farm in Mexico. That he said, you know, we need to pay more attention to the history of the area and the people and the exploitative project that they experience. Sarah also brought up issues of power, how it's structured, its different layers, and how it operates, and so on. So on the one hand, the deliberate planning of creating Musharraf downtown Doha as an environmentally and energy conscious area, I think is laudable, right? But on the other hand, we need to also be critical and ask questions such as, you know, who are the targeted audience of Musharraf downtown Doha? Are there still affordable housing in Qatar as well for everyone? What happened to the previous occupants of this area? Is Sahat al-Kahraba open to all? So these are some of the questions that I think, you know, scholars such as urban historians of technology, essay scholars need to address as well.
Thank you, Anto. I think I'll continue with another area of ambivalence, which has to do with, you know, one of the distinguishing features of Gulf states such as Qatar. In terms of providing energy to citizens, they rely on a rentier system, which includes, among other benefits, free or subsidized electricity, right? But at the same time, Qatar has also launched various consumer awareness initiatives under the National Program for Conservation and Energy Efficiency called Tarshid, Arabic word for to act with maturity and responsibility, and to raise awareness and enlighten thinking. Right? Is there a contradiction here? I mean, between the rentier logic of energy abundance and energy conservation?
Thank you, Firat, for this question. This is also a very good critical questions. Um, Maybe first I can mention a bit of a background first. From what I've learned from my students and reading literatures on this, yes, electricity is provided either free or highly subsidized here in Qatar. Free for Qatari citizens for their first houses, but not their second or third or fourth houses. Many residents, including the expatriate communities, get similar benefits, mainly from their jobs, but not all of them, I learned. Some still need to pay electricity when they rent a property here. Um, uh, as for me, I've never seen an electricity bill since I moved here to Qatar 5 years ago. I used to when I was living in the United States, and I was very electricity conscious consumer because of that. And I bring that habits here when I moved to Qatar. And Tarshid campaigns, I learned, started 9 years ago in 2012. They divided into two phases. The first phase is from 2012 to 2017, the first 5 years. And then the second phase, which we are in right now, is from 2017 to 2022. So going back to your question, I thought maybe we need to ask less about whether there's contradiction in these two measures, providing electricity for free or highly subsidized. And also there's a conservation program, and perhaps ask how effective this awareness campaigns to reduce electricity consumption. And the reason I say this is because other countries such as Indonesia, which I've studied closely, electricity has also been subsidized by the government. They're not free, but they've been highly subsidized. Electricity prices, especially for household consumers and in non-urban areas, are sold at a rate lower than what they should have been to cover the cost of production. Because setting electricity prices artificially low, setting electricity prices artificially low would benefit the ruling regimes, right? People love getting affordable electricity. But in Indonesia, campaigns to conserve electricity, save energy have been going much longer than they have in Qatar. So that much I know. One reason is because the state-owned electricity company, PLN, wouldn't be able to keep up with rising electricity demands because of its limited capacities to grow the electric infrastructure. So it's been promoting, campaigning, raising awareness among electricity consumers to conserve electricity and only use electricity as needed, and preferably for what they call production users, to use electricity for earning extra income. Okay. So the rentier logic in places such as Qatar and other Gulf states is to support the social contract, right, between the ruling elites and the citizens. Citizens give their political support in return for getting certain material benefits from their government. A similar, though not exactly the same arrangement, actually also happened in Indonesia. In what I term patrimonial technopolitics, in my book manuscript, President Suharto in the 1980s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, arranged to electrify villages and get them connected to the grid on the eve of general elections to try and gain support from villagers to vote for their government political party. And because electricity was something that many people in rural areas wanted, and they were glad to get electricity. Some villages received electric generators for free from the government. Many of them, were persuaded to vote for the government political party. So there's been attempts in the GCC countries to introduce electricity pricing reforms, actually. There's one study I read that shows when Saudi Arabia tried to increase its electricity prices in 2016, I believe, citizens protested on social media. And I made a note here that from that study, it says that the government fired its Minister of Electricity and Water, but kept the new prices. So there was somebody that had to take the blame, unfortunately. And in the same study, it also mentioned that in 2018, 11 Saudi princes spoke out against the eliminations of water and electricity subsidies from members of the royal family, but they were later arrested and detained in a maximum security prison. Kuwait did similar thing, trying to increase prices of diesel, kerosene, and aviation fuel in 2015, but political opposition in the country forced the government to revert back. Yeah. So I think the Qatari government didn't quite expect that electricity consumption per capita would keep increasing over the years. And when they decided to give this for free or heavily subsidize it. And seeing the increasing trend of average electricity consumption over the years made them worry that this is not a sustainable practices. I managed to find Kahrama's annual statistical reports here, and let me quote them here for you. The average per capita consumption of electricity in Qatar in 2008, and this is not including the industrial bulk consumers, was 8,704 kilowatt hour. And in 2019, it raised to 11,497 kilowatt hour per person per year. That's quite high, actually. And when the Tarshid campaign started in 2012, right, there's been a slight dip between 2012 to 2013 in the average per capita electricity consumption in Qatar, and also from 2015 to 2016. But then the numbers picked up again. So it seems that the Tarshid campaigns launched to moderate this increasing and worrisome electricity consumption, excessive electricity consumption here in Qatar. And it had some initial successes at the beginning in the early years, but haven't been quite successful recently.
Thank you, Anto. I think what you told us to me showed the extent to which popular desires, expectations, practices are at the core of, or should be at the core of our thinking about lived experiences of energy, right?
Yes.
And my next question, you referred already to your wonderful course that you have been teaching at Northwestern University in Qatar. I know one of the assignments for this course called Our Electrified World is a video project through which the students are expected to highlight an interesting aspect of electricity or light, or both in-house, compound, neighborhood, and their city. Can you talk to us about these projects, please?
I'd love to, Firat. So, like many of my colleagues, I believe, in the liberal arts program here at Northwestern University in Qatar, um, I used to assign only written assignments in my courses, uh, what I call reading reflections, written exams, and essays. But having been teaching at a media school for a few years, I realized that I hadn't given my students a chance to express their research and research findings in other forms of media that they have the skills in producing and editing. So I started in earnest to incorporate this type of assignment in the fall of 2020, so just last year, especially also because of the online learning mode that we were in during the pandemic. So for my introduction to STS course for their midterm project, I gave my students options to either write a paper, to record a podcast, to make an animation, or even to create a short video. And the creativity that my students brought to these assignments impressed me. They seemed to have fun in producing them, and I had fun evaluating them. It got me excited too. So I was inspired by their submissions, and I signed up for a 4-week online course in the basics of producing short video, how to write and edit the script, how to shoot, and how to edit the shots using Premiere Pro. And I took this course back in January of this year, and I enjoyed it. So given my newly acquired skills in video making and editing and pleasant experiences evaluating some creative projects my students submitted, I decided to assign this project for our Electrified World course this past semester. And another factor that pushed me to assign this particular assignment, as I mentioned, is because of the full online learning mode that we conducted. My students are not all of them are based in Qatar necessarily. There's one who joined us from Seoul, South Korea. So I have to tell you that I received, again, many wonderful and creative projects of this video project assignments. For example, a few students visited and created, for example, a few students visited and created interesting videos about the Museum of Illusions. Okay. I didn't even know such a place existed here in Doha until my students mentioned it as a possible site to explore in class. And one student made a video about fanus, or that's Arabic for Ramadan lanterns.
Wow.
And narrated a story how these lanterns came to symbolize the holy month in the Islamic calendar. Some students show how electricity is used in their dorms or dorm room or in their room. And while one student reveals how the majlis in his house is illuminated with, among other things, beautiful chandeliers. So another student showcases the experiment using both natural and artificial lights in his dorm room. And one student wrote a really poetic script for her video about darkness and light. So I really enjoyed that one as well. And my student who joined from South Korea, for example, created a video highlighting how his city's outdoor lightings illuminate the Han River. Okay? And another student created a well-scripted and well-edited video about the cafes in the Qatar Sports Club and titled her video Kahraba and Kahwa. Okay? And what I also like, and this is tied to the theme that we're addressing in this podcast, is the rest of my students created a video that critically examining and highlighting the excessive electricity consumption in and around Doha, and suggest some ways to conserve electricity consumption. Okay, so by doing this creative project, they became aware of their own lived experience with electricity. their own consumption patterns and habits and those around them, and suggest ways to increase awareness and reflect on this. So I was really pleased with their submissions.
Wow, what a great pedagogical tool to draw our students to lived experiences, daily experiences of energy. I hope you encourage some of your students to consider our joint certificate program in media and politics. Their creativity, their creative input to understand, to approach media and politics through the lens of energy and infrastructure, I think would be wonderful.
Well, thanks for that suggestion. Yeah, I will. Thank you.
Thank you, Anto, for this really fascinating and stimulating conversation. I learned a lot, and we look forward to your forthcoming book and your new research on energy studies on Doha. It was a great pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for inviting me in, and it's a pleasure being here as well. Thank you for having me, Firat.